A really exciting session called La Loteria as Creative Resistance. If you have not already seen, we will also be hosting a Loteria game night next week. And so we hope that some of you are able to join us. I know maybe even some of you here on the call this afternoon participated and created your own Loteria card that we will be using as part of that Loteria night. So we hope to see you there también. I also want to just remind you that yesterday was the first day that your enrollment appointments are available on your MySJSU. I know if you could believe it or not, next you're going to start enrolling for spring semester in just a couple more weeks. So if you haven't had an opportunity to check that, make sure that you check your MySJSU to see when you're going to be enrolling for spring semester, and make sure that you make appointments with your academic advisors if you need any support with that. We also have at Centro academic advisor liaisons to the various college student success centers. So please make sure you stay tuned on our link tree so you can meet with the advisors if you need any support in that area. But without further ado, I want to welcome our guest of honor, Dr. Luis-Genaro Garcia, who will be facilitating the session this afternoon. Before I turn it over to Dr. Garcia, I want to share a little bit about who he is and his background. So inspired by what is known as the critical tradition in education, known as critical pedagogy, Dr. Garcia is an artist, a scholar, and a former high school art teacher in South Central Los Angeles. As an educator and artist influenced by the theoretical frameworks of critical pedagogy, the funds of knowledge, and critical race theory in education, he focuses on challenging the social and political barriers that exist in communities of color. As an artist, he draws on his own social and political experiences as a resident and educator in South Central Los Angeles, constantly drawing on his own forms of cultural knowledge as a former student and former educator of the Los Angeles Unified School District. He reflects the historical and political experiences of marginalized communities through what he identifies as social realism and surrealism. His work is heavily influenced by Mexican muralist David Alfaro Siqueiros and printmaker Jose Guadalupe Posada, both known for their social and political commentary. As an educator of art for 14 years at his former high school and current teacher educator, he draws on the cultural assets of students and communities as relevant and accessible forms of art. Through this philosophy, he believes that students' home knowledge can be used by educators to develop new forms of cultural and relevant knowledge that will develop the creativity and independence of students, educators, and communities for social transformation and social change. Dr. Garcia is currently an assistant professor of art education at California State University, Sacramento, and continues working with local communities, schools, and arts organizations. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Garcia. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. And I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance. And as Lily mentioned, I'm currently an assistant professor of art education at Sacramento State University. But for the past 15 years, I was a high school teacher at my former high school. And so what I'm about to present to you is pretty much, an approach, a method that I've developed in drawing from not only my own experiences, but most importantly from the experiences of my students. And given that I grew up in the same neighborhood, I've developed different ways of doing culturally relevant projects with them as forms of empowerment through art education. And so I just kind of do that because of what I felt was missing in my own art education and as a potential artist. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. And so one of the ways in which I kind of engage students in their own knowledge, right, and develop their own knowledge, their academic knowledge, is by drawing on this game of La Loteria, right? For those of you that don't know, La Loteria is a popular Latin American game in Latin America now, and I'll be giving you a brief history on it. But I started drawing on their home knowledge to develop their language literacy, their consciousness, and their creativity. So with that said, here we go. I'm going to start with an overview of this presentation. And so I'd like to give you an idea what we're going to be doing, so that you kind of anticipate how it's all going to come together. So no, first and foremost, I'm going to introduce how I developed my passion for this work, right? Through what I identify as my positionality. I'm going to talk about creative resistance, which is sort of a term that I started using, the objectives on using the game of La Loteria. Um, I do also talk about the meaning of culture through an understanding of the funds of knowledge. We are going to have a discussion. I am going to ask that you have, you know, scrap paper and something to write with for notes. Um, and so then I'm going to have you all sort of build on this understanding of your funds of knowledge by creating a new Loteria card. And that's going to be our closing activity along with a share out. So with that said, I'd like to begin by sharing my work the way that I begin all of my classes. And one of the things that I like to share is that I came from a neighborhood with particular circumstances and hardships that you all as students, as educators, as community advocates may potentially work in. And so I do this to make students understand that our assumptions, our life experiences, our values are what we understand as a positionality that informs the way we read and we see the world. And in my case, as an educator, it's the way that I teach. It informs my teaching. So to begin, I wanted to point out is that this was me in elementary in 1989. And, this is what sort of sparked my interest in what I'm doing now. And so this was me in elementary, and what you see in the background is my first official mural that I did as a sixth grader, right? When my principal asked me if I can do the backdrop for our graduating class. And so I ran into this while I was completing my dissertation in grad school, right? I ran into this picture, someone forwarded it to me. And one of the things that I realized, what I highlight in the red cube, is that I painted, yeah, although I went to a school with predominantly Black and Latino students, I painted figures that were blonde and light skinned, right? And in 2017, when I was completing my dissertation, it made me think, what was it that gave me a conflicting sense of my own identity, right? What was it that I was being taught that gave me a conflicting sense of my identity? And so as the eldest of four siblings, right, I didn't really get any art experiences until like I got to high school. But at that time, because I was living with a single mom, um, I was driving my mom, my siblings to school, then dropping off my mom at work, and then going to school 30 minutes late. And my art class, which was first period, I would only get 30 minutes of it. So as a potential artist, as someone with a skill in being artistic, I never really got that engagement or support when it came to art education. And so this is the reason why, right? The A through G requirements in high school only require 1 year of fine arts for you to graduate high school. So what happens to all those talented students that are into visual or performing arts, right? You only get 1 year, and in a school, the school that I went to in South Central doesn't really offer those types of programs, right? Or it doesn't provide adequate and extensive art programs. So, it wasn't until I got to college, right, that I was really able to develop as an artist. And so as a community artist, right, I started talking to the experiences that were visible to others in the community. And so I started drawing on my own experiences and my own knowledges of car culture, and bringing all my experiences together to really critique art education and the structures that limited my own abilities, right? And so what you see here in these images are sort of the ways I started pushing back against, that traditional art education. And what you see in this last picture is me working, well, I'm not in there, but it's students that eventually worked on a mural outside of the school, because as a collective, we felt that the neighborhood needed more art in the community. And so students took it upon themselves to kind of create these proposals for a local elementary. And so based on my own experiences that I was only able to take art for 1 year, I kind of developed this program as an art educator where students would take 4 years of art. And this was one of the projects that they did in their last year. But to give you an example of how I sort of empower students, or I make students think beyond the classroom through art education, is through this picture that I show you here. And so this is an image of students that created a project in our classroom where they told their own narrative and participated in the May Day March of 2011. And so, of course, back then in 2011, HR 4437, the what was it? The House bill in Arizona that made it legal to practically pull people over if you look brown. They wanted to protest that in the May Day March. And so one of the things that we did is we sort of retold the narrative of the border crossing sign. And so, throughout my years of doing this work in graduate school, I kind of identified it as creative resistance, right? And I've sort of defined it as any creative forms of expression used by students that challenge systemic oppressive structures, actions, agendas, inequality, or racism that diminish the development of communities. And so one of the ways in which I do that, right, is by drawing on something that the students are familiar with, like the game of La Loteria. And so again, if in case you didn't know, La Loteria originated in the 1800s during the first Mexican Revolution. And it's similar to bingo, but rather than calling out numbers, you have these iconic everyday life images that are being used to play the game, right? And it's very similar to bingo. And so one of the things that I'll be doing here is showing you how I use this to use it as a learning tool for my students. So one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to give you an idea of what you're going to be doing in a short bit. This was a project that was done by a student in 2011 where she used her mother's occupation to challenge issues of gender and displayed an understanding of her social dynamics. So in the activity we are doing, we'll be drawing from our own home experiences or from your parents' occupation. Because in reality, if you think about it, your parents' occupations are the tools that have been your own source of stability or financial capital as we are and find ourselves in this ivory tower of the university or college. Okay, so here are a few things that I wanted to identify. So how is it that, so here's some 3 questions that I'm gonna want you to think of right now, okay? I'm gonna show you some images. I'm gonna show you some images that we're going to get into discussion in a couple of minutes during the presentation. But this is what I want you to consider, and this is where I want you to take your own notes. All right, so grab a piece of paper and just write some brief notes. But these are 3 things that I'm going to want you to think about as I show you these images. What do you see? What details develop your thoughts? What is communicated through these? All right, so think about those three things. I want you to choose one card, okay? Don't overwhelm yourself. But choose one of these cards and answer these three questions. What do you see? What details develop your thoughts? What is communicated through these? All right, so the first card that I'm showed is La Sirena, right? Which translates into the mermaid. El Negrito, the black man. La Dama is the lady. El Valiente, the tough guy. El Mundo, the world. El Apache, the native, or the Apache. El Borracho, the drunk. And La Chalupa is, I wouldn't know how to translate that, La Chalupa, but to me, it just seems like a woman that's running errands, right? On a canoe. All right, so if you're drawn to one of these particular images, what do you see? What details develop your thoughts? What's communicated through these? Okay, so yes, it's fairly quick, but again, this is the same thing that I do with my students. And as a potential educator or someone that's going to be working in communities or as a professor, these are my objectives, okay, with asking these questions. First and foremost, I use La Loteria to draw from students' home knowledge to develop social consciousness, reading skills, writing skills, and creativity. I use La Loteria to validate student knowledge as an asset and a capital for their own learning. I use La Loteria in the classroom to critically challenge issues of race, class, and gender that have existed in this game since the 1800s. And so every time that we play this game of La Loteria, when we're looking at these images and, you know, we're not challenging them or thinking about what's being shown, and we're playing with our younger siblings, with our kids or whoever, we're normalizing these images, right? And last but not least, I use La Loteria as a funds of knowledge that draws on critical pedagogy, critical race theory, as a tool for social transformation. All right, so just introducing you to the objectives. All right, and we're going to come back to those questions in a bit. Okay, so in order, so the frameworks that I use for these come from the funds of knowledge, right? Which are the everyday practices and resources that are passed down to students from family households. I also draw on critical pedagogy that uses the social political experiences of working class students to develop their social consciousness for social transformation. And I also draw on critical race theory and education because it acknowledges the oppressive aspects of society and education through race, class, and gender. And so if you think about these three frameworks, they're very similar and they could overlap each other, but they don't. They all have their very unique traits. And so these frameworks advocate for a socially just education of marginalized populations for the purpose of developing a social consciousness and social transformation. And so getting into the definition and understanding what are our funds of knowledge, right? And what really is cultura, right? And so one of the things that I show students is that when we think about cultura and the funds of knowledge, right, they are identified by Gonzalez in the funds of knowledge book as the everyday practices and resources that are passed down to students from family household and are used as navigational tools. And so one of the things that I highlight and tell students is that when you think about culture, don't think that culture is this idea that is reflected through holidays like Cinco de Mayo or St. Patrick's Day. That does not represent culture, right? We need to kind of push back against that idea that culture is fun, food, and festivals of a particular group, and it's not. And so one of the things that I identify with students is that part of our culture comes from our home experiences, right? And it's part of our funds of knowledge. And the funds of knowledge are identified as skills, education, communication, abilities, and practices that are generated in our very own homes, regardless of what cultural background we come from. So one of the things that I want to do is I want you to understand that you also have your own funds of knowledge. All right. And so with that said, I'm going to do an activity that's asking you a couple of questions. And what I want you to do is sort of just write down your answers, and they should be short answers, because I want you to understand that these are your funds of knowledge. Okay. So what are your funds of knowledge? And if you ask yourself some simple questions, your funds of knowledge, you could easily identify, right? And so one of the first question is, what language or languages did you learn at home? And so for me, that I grew up in a Latino home, Spanish, right? Spanish is part of my funds of knowledge, and so is English. So that means me being bilingual is part of my funds of knowledge. All right, so like I said, I write down your own answers on a separate sheet of paper, because you're going to be able to draw on these to develop your Loteria card later on in the presentation, in the workshop. All right, so what is the traditional food in your home, right? Have you cooked it with your mom? Did your mom show you how to do it? Did your dad show you how to barbecue? Did your dad, was that knowledge that was passed down to you by a family member? Family activities, or what family activities did you do together? Okay, and one of the ones I like to share is, one of the ones I like to share is when my mom would make me go to church. Me and my siblings go to church on Sundays while my dad just chilled at home watching the soccer games. So it's a family activity that I didn't really like, but we did it. And it's something that, it's a memory that I could use to talk about, you know, cultural activities. All right, what skills did your parents teach you? I had uncles and my dad teach me about fixing cars, which I eventually used when I was in college. My mom, I could say she taught me how to keep a clean house, but most of the time she made me clean the house. So that's another skill that developed from my parents. What educational activities do you remember engaging in with your parents? Right? There's this misconception that Latino parents do not care about their children's education. But from what I remember, I can tell a different narrative. My mom would have a jar of beans specifically for me when I was in elementary, because I would have trouble counting in my head. And so she would give me beans to count with, and slowly she started taking away beans. And then she'd tell me, use your fingers if you don't have enough beans. And then she eventually took all the beans, and I had to do everything on my own. All right. What TV shows did you watch together? Right. It doesn't matter whether it's a novela or something else. What has your neighborhood taught you? Is there something that you've learned in your neighborhood? Trust, looking out for one another, advocating for your community, how to communicate in the neighborhood, but then communicating differently in academia. And most importantly, what occupations did or do your parents have? And I like focusing on that one with this particular project, just because there's so much you can talk and draw on with parental occupations, with parental knowledge. All right, so I can come back to these when you do your activity. But again, these are quick answers, okay? And you don't have to have an answer for all of them. I'm just trying to give you some choices or some options for your card. Okay, moving on. So one of the things that I like to identify with students is that some of the answers that you came up with could be considered cultural icons. If you create some of those answers into an image, you sort of create it into a cultural icon, right? And so in this project, a student wanted to identify his dad as being hardworking, and to him, the hardworking man was the valiente, right? So he challenged el valiente by recreating the image and also changing the name, right? And so his narrative, from what I remember, said, to me, I did this image of my dad because to me, he's the valiente in my house. He doesn't have to have a knife for him to be valiente. All he needs is his tools. And he works long hours to make sure we have something to eat. So he's like, to me, that was the valiente in our household. All right. And so when I talk about cultural icons, right, in the game of La Loteria, I also talk about the cultural icons that exist in our communities. And so cultural icons are images of people, objects, myths, commonly used in our cultural spaces. And so this activity, the handout, was the questionnaire that I sort of gave you on the funds of knowledge, right? So think of a cultural icon related to your own funds of knowledge, right? And so with that said, right, I do add a little bit of humor in order for my students to understand what their funds of knowledge could be, right? And for that idea, for that understanding, I tell students that La Chancla could also be a funds of knowledge, right? That we're all familiar with, right? And so to add to that, I show you this video. So it's a short 2-minute video that I'd like you to watch related to this, to how this is a funds of knowledge. Okay, here we go.
Why are Hispanic children so well behaved? The secret is Hispanic culture, which emphasizes boundaries, developmental growth, and a traditional technique known as La Chancla. For centuries, the secret of La Chancla has helped millions of Latina moms focus attention to each child's unique needs, instill values of fairness and fair play, encourage healthy eating habits, learn the discipline required to excel in academics, moral reasoning. La Chancla can help every parent master a truly hands-off parenting style.
All right, so just adding a little bit of humor to this idea of the funds of knowledge, right? I bet you anything, none of you ever thought about La Chancla as something that promotes healthy eating habits, playing in a friendly way with, in a nice way with your siblings or whoever else. Obviously, we knew it as a form of discipline, but we never really thought about it as anything else. So in a humorly way, this sort of identifies how a simple object that's based in our own household could potentially be a funds of knowledge, right? And so here's where I want us to get into this discussion, right? I asked you the question earlier, what did you see? What inspired your thoughts? What is communicated from these visuals? All right, so what I'm gonna want you all to do is have a group discussion. So we're gonna split you up into groups right now. And so what I'd like you to do too, in 2 minutes, very short, sort of talk about these 3 questions, right? What did you see? What inspired your thoughts? What is communicated through these, right? And I picked these specifically because they all have hints or references to issues of race, class, and gender. All right, so I sort of want you to have this discussion, right, in a short 2 minutes, and then we're going to come back, right? This is exactly what I do with my own students. so that they could develop that consciousness on La Loteria, which they've never really thought about critically. So you'll get put into a couple of group sessions right now. And what I want you to do is sort of talk about what card you looked at and what did you think, and anything else that you might want to share.
It's like people are now being assigned to their breakout rooms. And Luis, I didn't ask you, did you want to be placed into a breakout room or just?
If I had the ability to jump from room to room, I would want to, but no, that's okay. Yeah, you can place me in one of the rooms.
Because if you want, I can move you around.
Okay, yeah.
Every few minutes.
Yeah, if you can do that.
La Chalupa.
Okay.
I just saw basically like a hardworking woman. I don't know what's in her boat specifically, but I know that she's doing something. So
Right.
that that shows me that she's like working, I guess.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else want to mention another card that was talked about besides El Mundo?
I can go. I chose La Dama.
Uh-huh.
So that one was more like how you're supposed to be dressed. So it's more of
Right.
a gender. And so I kind of compared it to like La Sirena and La Chalupa, and how they all have 3 different like roles.
Right.
And I also compared that with the men, because El Mundo is supposed like seems strong because he's carrying, you know, the weight of the world, I guess.
Right.
And El Borracho, I mean, you see that, or, you know, people say that Latinos tend to be more borrachos than anything.
Right.
And like El Valiente too, El Valiente is supposed to be, you know, this powerful man compared to like these women.
Right. No, of course. And so as I mentioned, is everyone back now? Yes.
Yes,
okay.
everyone's back.
So one of the things that you didn't miss anything if you just dropped in. I was just kind of gathering information, but the idea of us coming back to this larger group is to kind of share out some of the things that were talked about in your own group sessions. And I kind of started off by saying that one of the more popular images that was being talked about and critiqued in different ways was El Mundo, right? And so I want sort of people to chime in. If one person from each group can kind of just, you know, jump in and say, this is what we talked about, this is the image that we talked about. And if it's preferably 3 different images, that's, you know, that'll allow us to look at the different cards and to see what everyone else thinks. So would anyone like to go and start with what card you all discussed? You can just jump in, not at the same time.
I could say something.
And your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, Diana.
Diana.
A card that we discussed 3 of various cards, but one that I discussed was the El Valiente. I basically just said that the knife in his hand with blood on it kind of indicated, and the name of the card El Valiente, which is kind of like bravery and the feisty one. I said that can be kind of like related to what we perceive as like being brave, as like kind of like physical and violent in a way. Just a stance is more like of a defensive stance. I know others in my group talked about, I believe, La Sirena, and talked about that in the topic of vulnerability, and being in the water, out of her comfort zone, and just being exposed.
Okay. Yeah, so I think one of the, you know, and this is exactly what I sort of intend or kind of set up for students in my classroom to do, right? And so if you think about it, this is in a high school setting, but it could apply, you know, even with us right now, right? But one of the things that I do that you identified was El Valiente, right? And think again how this game has existed since the 1800s, since the early 1800s. And there's this idea, right, perpetuated in the game of La Loteria It's been about 120 years or so that, you know, we've normalized this idea of el valiente in our own community, right? And if you look at this image, it's a man that has a bloody sickle. He's got his sarape wrapped around his left arm because, you know, he looks like he looks like if he's about to fight someone, and he's wrapping his left arm to protect himself from the other person, right? But the fact that he has a bloody knife already, that means that it happened, right? And if this means to be valiente, what we are doing as we play La Loteria and we normalize this image is we kind of promote that idea, like this is what it means to be brave, right? You have to be macho, you have to be stand up for yourself, you have to use violence, right? And so that's something that, you know, we kind of have this discussion about. And thank you for mentioning La Sirena. And I do want to see if anyone else would like to sort of hop in on that. If you all talked about La Sirena, please share what you all kind of mentioned.
So hold on, let me just start my video. We, like, my group actually didn't talk about the Sirena, but we talked about El Mundo. But what I see in a lot of like what I see in a lot of like Hispanic cultures or Latinx cultures is whenever they like show propaganda with women, it's always showing like their breast in a way. Like they're always emphasizing like, oh, like this is how a woman is supposed to look. So I would say, like, I think Diana's mentioned it, how it was like her being out of her comfort zone as well. And I would say, yes, that plays like another role too, but I also feel like it also plays a role with how women are viewed in like the perspective of like the older days. And even now, like how women are like supposed to like show their breasts more, and then like that emphasizes their figure and everything. So yeah, that was just my perspective on the Sirena.
Yeah. No, and you absolutely touched on it. You know, and the point that I make to students, and the point that I'm gonna make to you all right now, is that even you know, as early as the 1800s, women were already being sexualized, whether they looked like La Sirena, La Dama, or La Chalupa, right? There's issues of gender that are specific, right? There's expectations that are specific to gender. And you mentioned, right, that how women are being used as symbols of sexualization. But if you think about beer companies, when they have these big displays of beer on the aisles at the supermarket, what figure is in front of it? It's usually, yes, exactly. A woman that's not dressed all covered up. She's, you know, sort of, again, being sexualized, right?
Or even
and so,
like sorry to interrupt, like
No.
commercials like where they like have women like in their bikinis and everything.
Right, exactly. And so the point that I make to students is that even when you look at magazines, right, it sort of perpetuates that expectation of this is what a woman should look like, right? And so La Sirena, again, the myth behind La Sirena is that this was a woman that lured sailors into their deaths, right, through her voice, right? She attracted men and put them in a trance because of her beauty and you know, her physical appearance, that they would throw themselves overboard and they would fall to their deaths, right? And so there's this negative representation of La Sirena, right? A woman, right? And again, just looking at La Dama and La Chalupa, right? There's these different sort of norms of what women should be and what they are and what they need to be doing. I'm gonna go with one more. So if you're really urging to like share out what you all said, please jump in, even if it's, you know, 2 more or 3 more people, but I really want to encourage this conversation.
I want to encourage Alonso. Alonso, I think you tried sharing a couple of times. So if you want to go ahead and share out, please feel free to do so.
So actually someone in the group, and I thought it was really cool, their reflection on one of the Loteria cards was actually El Mundo. And they said, and I'm not putting them on blast for them to speak, but I really appreciated them sharing that the La Loteria card for them within Mundo represented their mom, because they said that their mom is their world. So I thought that was pretty, I thought that was pretty cool. And so I just wanted to share that one.
Cool. And, if they don't mind, or I mean, can you share a little bit about how their mom was El Mundo?
They just said that like they're like, even though their dad also does things for them, like their mom is like does a lot for them. So
okay,
yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, and one of the things that I always connect with that card, right, of El Mundo, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a single parent home. And so for that reason, right, I've always looked at El Mundo, like, obviously I've looked at this game for such a long time that I've envisioned every single one of these cards in their own unique way, right? And so when I do see El Mundo, I do think about my mom, because as a single mom, not only did she have to sustain us, her 4 children, but everything else that I've, you know, as an adult and as a father, I've kind of dealt with, right? But to do it as a single parent, you know, I have to give credit to my mom for everything that she did for us. And I'm sure you all feel the same. And so, yes, this game has perpetuated the idea that a man, you know, is the only one strong enough to hold the world on his shoulders. But honestly, I think women have a lot more labor that hasn't been credited to them. So thank you for sharing that, Alonso. And I know it wasn't your narrative. I know it was your group mate's narrative. So please thank her for me, or him. Okay, one more, if anyone wants to jump in. Okay, going once, going twice, come on. If you really want to say it, just go for it. Okay, it's all good. All right, so coming back to this, so we just had a discussion, right, that talked about how we just drew on our own cultural understandings and knowledge, right? And we just talked about issues of race, class, and gender that we normally don't think about when we're thinking about La Loteria, right? And so what I want you all to think about is how this has been normalized, right, in our community, right? There's ideas of machismo, there's ideas of sexualization, there's gender norms, there's, you know, el negrito that was mentioned, right? And we often think of the term el negrito as being a form of endearment when identifying someone that's African American, when in reality, even by saying el negrito or el negro, it's just as offensive, right? And so we often need to think about how that also affects our own communities, because in the Latinx community, there are issues of racism, right, between Black, dark-skinned Latinos and light-skinned Latinos. So that does exist. That form of white supremacy does exist in the Latinx community as well. All right, so just some objectives, right? Kind of reminding you, what were the objectives of this? All right, and did we meet them? All right, did I draw on your own funds of knowledge to talk about, you know, these issues in the game of La Loteria? Did I validate your knowledge as a form of capital? Obviously, your experiences became that form of capital. Did we challenge issues of race, class, and gender? And did we use our funds of knowledge as a tool to socially transform our thoughts, our way of thinking, and did we use interdisciplinary subjects? You know, the way that we use our interdisciplinary subjects is that oftentimes the knowledge that exists in our homes are subjects that no one has really identified as a resource in our classes. So with that said, those are the same exact goals that I want to engage students in. All right. And so the reason why I do this, right, is this is how I sort of set up the game of La Loteria activity, right? Where I have students create a Loteria card is really a project that's a culmination of a unit where I first ask students to do a family tree so that they can know the history of labor and migration in their community, and not in their community, in their family, right? And so this first part of the project draws on students' understanding of their own family history, right? And some may not know that history, and so the idea is to get them involved, right? I mentioned earlier, there's a misconception that Latino families don't care about their children's education, and so I also created opportunities for parents and students to work together. And how better to do that through a family tree, right? But aside from that, right, the family tree is one thing, but then I asked them to interview their parents about their family's migration history. And so in this example, this student identifies the family's place of origin and who traveled to California and who traveled to other parts of the United States. And so with that said, right, students start developing an understanding for the history of their own families, to the point where I have them create a self-portrait, right? And the self-portrait, what you see here in the front, is obviously a portrait of the student, but the background tells a narrative of the family history, right? And so with this example, the narrative says, my portrait shows a butterfly because they travel restlessly. So has my family, moving from place to place. We lived in Texas for 3 years and moved to Los Angeles. My mom is also from El Salvador, and she is both my mom and dad. My dad has never been in our lives, but I have the McDonald's sign because that's how they met. And the McDonald's sign is right here to the left of the image, right? And in El Salvador, she cleaned for hotels. She moved here when she was 18. So this is a knowledge, right, that's generated in a house, like family historical knowledge that is not often used in the classroom. And it could be used in a way to create a timeline, because that's one of the Common Core standards, to create a timeline of a historical event. And so building that familial knowledge enables me to come up with this idea of La Loteria, right? And now that students understand their family history, they understand the social dynamics of how their family members sort of survived and navigated life here in the United States. Then they come to an understanding, why does my mom or why does my dad do what they do, right? And so how is that connected to my understanding of my socioeconomic environment? And so this is a narrative that the student came up with. What I drew for my Loteria card was a niñera, which is a babysitter, because my mom took care of kids when she was young. And now that she is older, she still takes care of kids, right? She identifies her home knowledge. I think it's important to reflect in the game of La Loteria, because Latinos, Mexicans take care of kids in their homes and not in daycares like whites or rich or the rich, etc. And so she makes a connection, right, from her own family history to how that is related to the larger socioeconomic structure. And so with that said, developing her political awareness is evident in this case. So our activity starts now. All right. So what I'd like you all to do is think about, and drawing from the answers that we sort of came up with related to our funds of knowledge, I want you to create a Loteria card that counters one of these Loteria cards that reflects issues of race, class, and gender. All right. To give you an idea, I kind of wanted to show you a couple of examples. Right. So number one, I'm going to switch my screen. I'm going to switch to my camera. All right. So these are my notes, sorry. But the idea is, how are we challenging some of these images that we see on here? All right. And so the way I sort of came up with this was, you're able to see, right? My camera? Yes, okay. So this is sort of what I've come up with, right? I talked about my mom being a single mother, right? And challenging El Valiente. How would I change El Valiente into a more positive representation of our community, right? And so what I did is I drew my mom sitting at the bus stop, you know, because as a single mom, we didn't drive. She had to get up at 4 a.m. or earlier, wait at the bus stop at 4 in the morning to go to work. And so to me, I'm changing this image into this image as well, drawing from my own, you know, life experiences. The other one that I kind of wanted to show you all, and I was sort of excited to share this one just because of its relativity to San Jose State, right? But this could be also another image of El Valiente, right? It could also be challenging El Negrito, right? Because El Negrito, right? Why can't we just say, show a more positive image of a black man, right? And to me, this could either be El Valiente, it could be El Atleta, it could be El Profesor, right? Because John Carlos and Tommy Smith were athletes. John Carlos and Tommy Smith were Black Panthers. John Carlos and Tommy Smith represented, we're bringing attention, national attention, to the civil rights violations of African Americans in the US. And so with that said, I want to invite you all to kind of come up with something fairly quick that's going to be a form of inspiration to you and how you can challenge one of these cards in the game of La Loteria, right? And think about how that should be an inspirational resource for you as you navigate academia. Okay, so I want to invite you all to get your index cards, to get your colored pencils. Obviously, I had some time to work on this one, right? And, you know, just a quick sketch that I sort of came up with for this image. But again, this could easily be anything. And I can actually call it La Pantera or the Panther, either in English or Spanish. You use your own home language. So with the next few minutes, right, five minutes or so, I'm gonna give you some time to come up with a Loteria image that's challenging one of these original cards. So can we start doing that? And we can share out even if we're not finished once we get closer to that. So I want to invite everyone to sort of start working on the card, even if it's a stick figure. Remember that the most important part here is how you've developed a new form of consciousness, and not so much the artwork. The artwork's not important, it's the concept, it's the idea, it's the empowering idea. So if we can sort of, you know, work on your card, that'll be awesome. For everyone to sort of share what you're working on, and it doesn't have to be particularly finished. But Elisa, if whoever participates, can you pin their video so that it's the one we see on the big screen? So anybody that would like to share what you're working on, and if you can tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and what Loteria card you're challenging or creating a new narrative for. And I do want to say that I've obviously had a lot more time to work on this, so I'm sorry if, you know, you're that, you know, if your image doesn't look like this yet, that's fine. You know, I understand that you're just working on it right now, so let's be clear about that. But can anyone jump in and let us know what you're working on,
I
and
can share mine.
maybe put it up on the screen?
So I hopefully doesn't show reverse, but this is what I have. It's a frijol. I chose a frijol because I feel like all of my family eats frijoles like 7 days a week. Like they have to have it every week.
Yeah.
And it's something that we always have. So that's why I drew a frijol.
Mm.
I didn't want to do beans because it would just look like mush. So I
Yeah.
just did a single bean. And
Okay. Okay. That's awesome, Regina. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so, you know, like sometimes we often don't think about this, and I'm saying this as an educator, right? Because even in college, I think you're assigned to provide sort of a an assignment. At least I remember in English class that I was assigned an assignment that explained how to do something, right? And so this is an opportunity for anyone working with students to say, you know what, you just, Regina, you just talked to me about your family cooking beans at home every day, right? At least that's, to your understanding, that there's a knowledge there that exists that you can use in an assignment to kind of explain the step-by-step process, right? In elementary, you're asked to do like a recipe, a family recipe, and there you go. But you know, a lot of the problem in our education system is that we don't often acknowledge the assets that exist in our homes. So thank you for sharing that. And can you actually show it again?
and then I put 7 right here because just to represent like the 7 days a week.
Okay, yeah, no, that's beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Anyone else?
I can go ahead and share mine, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I reinterpreted El Mundo. It might be backwards, I'm sorry.
That's cool.
But I drew my mom at the bottom, and instead of drawing the actual world, I drew who's made up in my family. So it's my brother, me, and my grandma, because my mom does parent her parent. Right. And I try to make my mom's face kind of ambiguous looking, like somewhere between not having an expression and having a slight smile. Right. And contrasted that with like our smiles, because she always like used to tell us that like she could take the weight of the world if it means that we're okay. So I kind of want to interpret that into the card.
That's cool. That's awesome. And I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. And so one of the things that I do want to, you know, say is that I very much appreciate how everyone is sharing a little part of themselves, right? And so part of this idea of drawing on the funds of knowledge is not only to build community amongst ourselves, but also share our parts of our, you know, ourselves that we often see that we have in common, right? If we don't share anything, we won't understand that we have that we share similar struggles, and therefore, like the opportunity to build trust and build community doesn't develop. So thank you for that, Citlali. What was I gonna say? So here's an opportunity, right? Here's another opportunity that you sort of made me think of, right? In elementary, we're often asked to write about someone that inspires us, right? And it's usually like someone famous, like a civil rights leader, or someone in television, right? What happened to choose someone in your family that inspires you, right? And so that's another key opportunity. And what better information than your own personal information that you have the resource at home. So just some thoughts. And thank you again, Citlali, for that. Anyone else?
Hi, I can share next. Thank
Hi,
you
Yesenia.
for sharing. Hello. So in my drawing, I actually challenge, oh snap, let me take off my background so it can be clear. But on my drawing, I try to challenge two different cards. So La del Mundo, and then with the title El Valiente. Well, mine is Las Valientes, because I try to draw my, so I'm not sure if you can see it well, but there's a three because it's myself, my mom, and then my sister. So we've been very united all our lives. So it just I wrote Las Valientes because it kind of challenges the valiente image of like a macho man and more of like a like mujerista. And so it just shows like our different, like the dynamic between all of us and how we all kind of bring our own unique energies. So I drew myself with a book because I really like school, and then I drew my mom with the knowledge, with the little light bulb, and then the heart with the love. And she's in the middle because she's always like the founding, I would say, pillar of us three. And then my sister with like a bocina, because she's very outspoken and she tends to always speak out her mind. So together we're like this very strong force on top of the world. So and then I added the luna, and I mean the luna and the sol, just to bring in that duality. And so, and oh, actually the nubes is in the Las Valientes too. So I guess the triple dynamic. So yeah, that was my drawing. But thank you so much for the workshop. I think it was really, really inspiring. And sin querer, like I really liked how it came out, and I just drew it right now.
Well,
But
that's
yeah.
cool. I'm glad. I'm glad. And so, the other part is, how engaging, it's something that I want you all to think about, is how engaging has this activity been, because it's based on your own experiences. And so for the most part, if you think about your own educational experience, and if you think about the teachers that inspired you, for whatever reason, they must have made some sort of relevant connection with the work that they would assign. But when you think about, the bad experiences that we've had in our academic experience, it's been because they've been disconnected from our own backgrounds or from our own knowledge. So thank you for that, Yesenia. And I'd like right now, I mean, we're in a momentum. Would anyone else like to jump in and share?
I can share. Just one last. My name is Diana again, once again, and what I did was, I don't know if you can see, it's like a little self-portrait. It's kind of not really that good. It's called La Enfermera. I'm studying to be a nurse currently. The reason why I did this is I kind of wanted to challenge two things, like all the female cards, like La Sirena, La Dama, they were really portrayed as like being very like feminine, very kept to themselves or exposed. And like, I feel like this is another way to kind of be brave in a way to share knowledge and to kind of signify, I don't know, sharing knowledge and stuff. Also, I did want to mention, I kind of like how you opened my eyes about how like Mexican parents are portrayed as not really being involved in their children's education, because it kind of reminded me of when my mom, she would always take me to the library. And I didn't really think about that until you mentioned it. And even before we started school, she would make us like try to see words, recognize words, colors, shapes. And even once we started school during the summer, she would give us summer homework when we really have summer homework, but she would give us like booklets and like things to do to like really learn, like kind of get ahead of the game. And I kind of didn't really appreciate that until you mentioned it. So thank you.
No, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. It's, I'm trying to not get emotional here, but this is exactly right. This is exactly what connects us all together. And even me getting emotional, right, is sort of challenging this idea of, men not getting emotional. But for that matter, Diana, I just want to say thank you for sharing that, because, you know, it's definitely something that I didn't think about. You know, when I shared my mom's image of her getting up at 4 a.m., her and I don't have the best relationship, but you know, it's this activity, this game, this research that I've been doing has really made me think about everything she's ever done for us. And so your story just kind of reminded me of that. So thank you. Um, but anyway, would anyone else like to share? And Diana, I very much appreciate that. You see, so now there's like this understanding, right, about the things that your mother would do for you, and it kind of made me think about what my mother did for me. And I'm going to say one more, just because I do want to, I mean, I would like to hear from everyone, but I do kind of want to respect everyone's time. Would anyone else like to go?
I can go. I kind of did something similar to what Yesenia and Diana, and I don't know how to pronounce your name, but can you pronounce it for me, please?
Itlali?
Yeah, Citlali. There you go. It was just like El Mundo, and then it has like a woman, but she has a cape. So, and that was like my perspective, because I know you visited our group when I was speaking about El Mundo, and how I was saying how like I feel like in a lot of Hispanic or Latinx family households, you're taught to think that the man is your main supporter, and that they're like your main, like you're supposed to kind of give to them, even though like, and like from my perspective, I would say, because when I grew up, my dad wasn't really in the picture, so it was only my mom and I. So I would say like, even like she would, like how you guys were talking, how your mom was your main supporter, and how a lot of people think that just because your parents work, because my mom worked two jobs. She worked two jobs in order to like support like her and I. So I would say that many people think, oh yeah, like your parents aren't really involved. But my mom would always make sure to go to like all of my school conferences, or she'd make sure to like stay in contact with my teachers to make sure my grades were up to date. And she would sign up, even though I didn't like this, she would sign up for the like the weekly grading things, where like they'd send you like a grade report in like high school and middle school. So it was just like the way I drew it was kind of like representing my mom, how my mom is my world to me, and how for her, like she, although we didn't have a lot, she still gave me as much as she could possibly give me.
Right.
And she still does it to this day. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
why I was sharing this.
No, thank you, Alejandra. And you know, both you and Diana, right? We you know, if you think about your educational experiences, how many times did we have the opportunity to talk about our own families, or for us to develop an understanding of what our families do for us? And so as an educator, you know, I share this, right, as a way to use the funds of knowledge to not only connect with your students, but getting to know them. If you do this, what are your funds of knowledge activity, right? You're going to find out little bits of them that are going to connect everyone together. And so if you create assignments from that, or you know, in whatever profession you're in, right? If you use and draw on the funds of knowledge of whoever you work with, right? That's just going to develop an opportunity for us to learn about one another, to trust each other, and to develop some consciousness within that community. So thank you again for that. I'm going to go back to share my screen because okay, and so with that said, this is where I sort of end the presentation, or wrap up the presentation. But you know, first, I'd like to thank everyone for sharing your stories, for sharing your knowledge, for thinking, different than and maybe you weren't comfortable at first, but just thinking a different way about how we engage in our own families and our own households. But with that said, I want to thank everyone for their participation, and I want to highlight that I dedicate this work to all those students who have had to struggle in their own educational trajectories. And I often think of my own students, past and present, and to their parents, most importantly, whose struggle is never ending. So thank you for your participation. My email, if you want to contact me, is luis.garcia@csus.edu. One of the things that I would really, really appreciate is if you want to take a picture of your Loteria card and upload it to social media and hashtag it Critical Loteria, or tag me, or tag Centro. But I would really like to show what the funds of knowledge looks like in a critical way. So if you want to tag Centro, myself, or even hashtag us, that would be really cool. And so with that said, I'd like to thank you one more time. Thank you for having me and for giving me this opportunity. Lily and Elisa, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please let me know. More than willing to stay a little bit longer if you all have any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. And if everyone here, if you want to go ahead and you can use your reactions at the bottom to give a round of applause to Dr. Garcia for joining us, for being in community with us, for keeping it real, bringing your whole self to this space with us. That truly is a gift that we don't even know how to repay, other than, as he asked, hashtagging. I put here Critical Loteria SJSU. And I also want to invite you all, as I had mentioned, unless you came in a little later, next week on the 27th, we are having our Loteria game night. And we had asked people to submit any creative original Loteria cards. And so if you haven't had a chance to do this, or you want to work on yours between now and then and still submit, I'll have Elisa email you all the link if you'd like to submit your final product of your Loteria card for that night. And we encourage you to continue hashtagging using the hashtag Critical Loteria SJSU so that we can see what you've created. And so I want to thank again, Dr. Garcia, so much for your time and your energy and your cariño, your love to this project. And I hope that all of you enjoyed we call this a power lunch hour with Dr. Garcia, and we hope to bring you back. We hope that we could do some follow-up with you as people continue to engage in ways that we can continue to strategically and critically challenge and resist these assumptions that we have about our cultura. And so next time you play Loteria, even if it's not with us, but with your own familia, we hope that you can use some of the teaching and the learning from this session to have critical dialogue with your familia and your friends.
Right.
So muchas gracias. We'll stick around, Elisa and I, if anybody wants to have any other questions. But gracias, Dr. Garcia.
Yeah, and actually one more thing. Can we all take like a group picture with our showing our Loteria card, if y'all don't mind? Let me see.
Oh, I have to.
Okay, so all right, here we go. A la una. A la una, a las dos, a las tres. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. And you have my contact information. If you want to contact me for whatever reason, if you're interested in becoming a teacher, an artist, whatever, you can either, ask Elisa for my contact, or Lily. I'll be more than happy to talk with you all about this.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Everyone, take care.
Gracias.
Gracias. Have a great day.
Thank you. All right, so.
Yay! We did it. You did it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is such an inspiring, this is the highlight of my day today.
Cool.
So,
Awesome.
muchas
Well, I
gracias,
appreciate
Luis.
that. Thank you. Thank you both again.